Domicile Design. And here at Domicile Design, we're a custom drapery workroom, and we specialize in window treatments, slipcovers, pillows, cushions, and almost anything for the home that has to do with fabric and interiors. We also work a lot with other textiles, so you may see on our channel other videos with other pieces, small projects that have to do with textiles as well. But today I get a lot of questions about slipcovers, and this project I thought would be a good piece to demonstrate how to make a slipcover with a Parson's chair. This is for a client. This is a fabric that's by Cravat. And you can tell that this does not have a skirt on it. So it's a really, really basic, simple slipcover. And I thought it would be great for a quick tutorial on how to make a slipcover. I'm not going to show you every step all of the way. You will see it, and we'll sort of speed up at certain processes. I'll kind of talk you through the process, but I'm kind of assuming that if you're interested in making this slipcover, that you're already going to have some basic sewing skills. So I'm not going to teach you how to sew a straight line or backstitch or any of that. I'm assuming that you might know how to make darts, so when I say to make a dart, you'll see where. If you have any questions, just let me know. So on this piece, because it's just a straight piece, straight back, this one doesn't require a zipper. So most of my slipcovers will have a zipper, and they'll usually be on this back side here. It'll come down right along the seam. But this piece comes on easily without a zipper, and it's a nicer look without. So the way it attaches is there's a row of cording down here, and there's Velcro that's attached under the seat. You can't see it because it's stapled under this edge. And at the very end, I'll show you how I haven't put Velcro on this front edge. So I'll show you how I put Velcro on the front edge and how we secure the slipcover. But for now, I'm going to remove it, slide it back a little. So there's a slight tuck in right here. I can stick a few of my fingers in on this crack right here, and that's what kind of helps keep the slipcover in place. So here's my slipcover off of the chair, and now I'm going to show you how I made it. This is a technique that I don't do all the time, but because I have to make 4 of these covers, I made a pattern, and that's why I thought this would be a good piece to show how to make a slipcover on a Parson's chair, because I had to make a pattern, and you can probably see these pieces a little bit clearer. So this was my seat pattern here, and all I did is take some scrap fabric and I draped it on the chair exactly how I wanted it. I marked here for a dart. That's where a seam is going to go for the corner. I marked on the edge exactly where the piping goes along this edge. I marked for my tuck in here, and then I had a piece for the front and one for the back. So this is the top. This piece went here, and because it's meeting the piece for the top back, I made a few placement marks where these pieces meet up. So I marked on my pattern a hatch mark here in the center, and this was all flat and pinned. I used tailor's chalk to mark my lines. There was another little pleat up here, a little dart. And then where the front and the back meet, I put a hatch mark front and back here, front and back here, so that when I have these pieces to assemble, I have a reference point of where they should meet. So normally I wouldn't make these patterns, but because I had 4, it was a way to sort of speed up the process. Normally I would just take the fabric, I drape inside out, so I would put the fabric down right side to the chair, wrong side out, and I would just cut, pin, mark each piece, each chair that I have. Even if I have 2 identical chairs, I drape the fabric. So now I'm going to show you, once I have these patterns, then I can cut out the pieces in the decorator fabric. So because I have 4 of these chairs, for this project I'm going to serge all my edges. Then I'm going to take it to my sewing machine and I'll show you how I put it together. So I'll take you to the serger first, and you'll see me just serging the edges, and then I'll take it to my my straight stitch machine, which is over here. I'll readjust the camera and I'll show you how I stitch it all together. Okay, so now I'm back at my serger, and I'll just talk to you while I'm serging these edges. A serger just does an overlock stitch. I'll show you in a minute. We can see that. There's a little overlock stitch right along the raw edge where we cut. And I like to do that on fabrics. This is, you can tell, it's kind of a woven chenille. It's also backed, so it's fairly stable. It really doesn't unravel after I cut it, but it's a nice finish edge on a slipcover, and especially where there are 4 of them and they may go off and get cleaned. It's a step that I like to take. I don't do it on every slipcover. There are certain pieces, actually I probably don't do it on many covers, especially sofas, things like that. I won't serge, and it's mainly because the way I pin fit. The way I pin fit, I pin with my cording already in place in the seams, and so to get all of that under serger is a bit cumbersome. But when I make a slipcover this way, where I just have pattern pieces and I've got flat pieces to work with for assembly, then I serge the edges. I serge the edges like when I make a pillow. I will serge those edges. So, I'm going to do, that was the back. This piece here, serge this one. Something to keep in mind when you are draping a slipcover for any piece, you need to keep in mind print or pattern direction. In this case, this is doesn't have a print or a pattern, but it definitely has a weave. So when I laid out my fabric pieces, I made sure that they were all going in the same direction. So there's generally an up to fabric, and you want to know from the manufacturer which way is up. And on your pieces, on your upholstered pieces, you want to be conscious and aware of where that up is on each piece, so that you can cut your pieces out or drape your pieces around that furniture so that everything is going in the direction that it should be. And if you're not sure, sometimes it gets confusing. if you're new to slip covers and you're not sure and you're working with a print, then take a look at a chair or a sofa that has a very distinct print to it, and take a look and see where the manufacturer has placed the print, and that'll be a good reminder to you of which way you need to have your fabric running. Oftentimes on a sofa, if you've got a solid fabric, you can railroad the fabric, which means that you turn the whole 54-degree width sideways, and that allows you to run the fabric the total length of the sofa without having seams in it. So you want to check with the manufacturer and see, a lot of times if it's a fabric that is made for the upholstery industry, it will be a fabric that was already designed to be railroaded. So you want to check, if you're buying fabric, you want to check and see if it's a fabric that's supposed to be railroaded or not. I don't often work with fabric that has a texture or a nap to it, but if you do, that's another type of fabric that you want to make sure the nap, it's usually running down. So if you run your hand over it, it should be smooth and soft going down. If you rub your hand the opposite direction, it'll be kind of prickly going in the reverse way. So all of your fabric on an upholstered piece, a slip cover that has a nap to it, when you're sitting, you always, if you're, imagine brushing your hand down the arms or down the cushion, you want the nap running in that downward direction. So the nap is going to be running down from the back of the cushions, down the seat, down the front. Just something to be aware of when you're laying your pattern pieces out or you're actually draping your fabric. And when I cut these pattern pieces out, I left myself a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I don't need to trim anything off at this point. I'm trimming off a little bit just because of the curves, but I'm not really intentionally cutting anything off. I really just want to encase the edges here. So I have about a 1/2 inch seam allowance on all of these pieces. I've already cut my welt cord. I've actually cut the bias strips, so I always cut my bias or my welt cord strips on the bias, and that because that gives you some stretch. I'll show you when I get to my machine what I mean about that. And I allowed myself 1/2 inch seam allowance when I cut out those bias strips. So once my welt cord is in and it's folded over on itself, it'll be the same 1/2 inch seam allowance, or it'll be just shy of it, so that I can see where my edges line up. And I'll show you that on the straight stitch. Okay, so that is all 3 of the pieces that I needed for this piece. They're serged. Here are the edges. And now I'm going to take it over to my straight stitch and I'll show you how I stitch it. Okay, I'm back at my straight stitch machine right now, and I'm going to show you how I stitch these 3 pieces together to make our slip cover. So the first thing that you're going to notice, I've got the straight foot on. This is called a skinny foot here, but you could just have a regular foot on here to do your straight stitching. And the first thing I'm going to stitch is this area right here. I had 2 darts on the front of the seat, and I've got 2 darts on the back of my chair. So this is the back piece, the top corners. So I'm going to stitch these, and all I need to do is take where I cut out here, fold it in half, use my 1/2 inch. I've got a 1/2 inch marker on my plate here. Again, this isn't really a sewing tutorial, so if you're a sewer, you should know how to find that 1/2 inch mark. So that's one corner. Here's the other corner over here. Move that away. My thread came out, so I had to re-thread it. So this is the top of my slipcover. And you can see by doing that little dart, that's the top corner of my chair. And this is the other one. Each piece is going to be different. Yours may be slightly different than this. This chair, I just have to follow the lines of the upholstery, and that'll give me the contour and the fit that I want. So on this one, I needed to make those darts. Here's another dart for the corner. This is the seat. And you'll see why I'm doing these pieces first. The next pieces, when I put them together, they're going to have cording, and I'm going to have to switch to a different foot that works with the cording. So when I'm doing a slipcover, I usually stitch all of the seams that don't involve cording in the first step. So here's another example of the corner. This is the corner of my seat, right there. So the other seam that I need to do, because I want to stitch all of my straight stitches first, the next seam that I need to stitch is where my tuck-in was, because that's the other seam that is not going to have any cording in it. The side, I don't know if you noticed, I can show it again, but where the back meets the seat on the sides, that's a place where I do not have cording. So these pieces, I don't know if you can see all this. Let's see. Maybe if I do that, you can kind of see the shape. The shape is like really funky, right? This is the tuck-in here, and these pieces here, these are my angled, this is my angled side. and that's how it turned out. So what I want to do is make sure that the center of my seat and the center of my back are matched together, are lined up. And you'll notice, like, I don't use a ton of pins. I've mentioned this before. When I sew, I really don't, I use the minimal pins. I only use pins in strategic places. If you go over a pin and your needle strikes it, it can really mess up your machine. And it's done that to me enough. And it just takes time to pin everything. And I've been doing slipcovers for about 30 years now, almost 30 years. So I pretty much have them figured out. But, you know, I will pin, so that sort of marked my center there. I'm going to put a pin here on the top. I'm going to put another pin down here on the bottom side, really just because I've got the pins in my hand. Then I'm going to see where this is. That's going to line up with that, and this is going to pivot and line up that way. And remember, our back piece is coming into here as well. So I'm going to stitch this seam right in here, keeping my 1/2 inch seam allowance. And I have white thread here, and I've got light colored fabric, so you may not see this so well. But I'm just simply, I've got it lined up, you know, here's my center section. I've got my edges lined up. And when I get to this side, I just hold it in place as I'm stitching. If you need more pins, you certainly should use the pins that make you feel comfortable. But for me, you'll see that I don't always pin things out. I kind of line things up, and I'll adjust as I go. Okay, so that is my back. That's the back and the tuck-in piece. And the next piece we're going to stitch, we're going to get the back, because really the seat is done, and the only we just have to add the third piece, which is my back. And that's the piece that's going to have cording, goes up and around and down. And so with this piece, or I was telling you that I put placement marks on my pattern so that I can line things up. And you may not be able to see it, but bring it a little closer. There's a pencil line here, a little hashtag. This is my center back of the back. So there's a hash mark there, and on the sides, on each side, I've actually got 2 hash marks on the sides, and I've got 2 hashtags, pencil hashtags, on the side of the other piece that's comprises the back too. So on the sides, I'm going to line up these pencil hashtags. I'm going to line it up to the center, and I'm going to line it up to the side. And I will put a pin in so that I know I've got them lined up. But you're going to see as I go, I'm going to actually be stitching in the cording as I assemble this. So some people might want to put the cording onto one of these pieces or the other and then attach the other piece to it. You can certainly do that. With me, because I do this for a living, I try and make things as streamlined and as accurate as possible. So for me, I do it all in one step. I do the cording, I insert the cording. You'll see I haven't even pre-sewn the cording. I'll show you what it looks like, but I'm just going to put pins here so that I don't have to stop and kind of fuss with the general placement. I'll know if I hit these pin sections correctly that everything's going to line up for me fine. And that's my fifth one. So that's going to end up pretty much level here. So that gives me a pretty good idea of where everything's at. Again, this pencil to this point, that is my stitch line again. So now to the cording. Remember, this isn't a tutorial for sewing, but this is my bias strip here. And a bias means it's cut diagonally to the grain of the fabric. And when you do that, it allows the fabric to stretch. So cording is often cut for slip covers and for garments. It'll generally be cut on the bias so that as you're stretching, you're usually going over curves. The cording inside, this is the welt cord, it's cotton. And so you want it to come over nicely and you want it to stretch while it's going around curves. You don't want it to bunch up. An upholsterer, sometimes they most often cut their bias on the straight of grain. And that just has to do with the fact that when they're fabricating, they can manipulate fabric and they can put a staple in to keep everything secure, and they can pull it and stretch it in ways that we can't. Our piece, needs to have a little bit more forgiveness in it. So doing your cording on the bias is going to give you that forgiveness that you need. So the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change from my straight foot to a foot that looks like this. And if you can see, it has a little curve there. And that's where the cording is going to sit under that curved piece. The needle's actually going to go on this side. And that's what I have for a cording foot. This is called a cording foot. So it kind of looks funny like that. It looks like a big wooden shoe kind of thing. They come in different sizes for different size welt cord. If you don't have this foot, and before I didn't always have this foot, I would just use a zipper foot. And that works well as well, just as good. If you have a domestic machine, this is an industrial machine, which is why it sounds louder. If you have a domestic machine, you may have a hard time sewing with all these layers on a domestic machine. So don't get discouraged. It isn't you, it's probably the machine. And then if you're doing a slipcover, you may want to stick to thinner fabrics if you're working on a domestic machine. So the only thing I need to watch out for when I'm sewing is I'm going to make sure that this seam here is laying flat open. I don't want it doubled over on itself. I want most of my seams to be open as much as possible. And I'm going to compensate for this little jog that I have as well. But when I start my cording, so I also don't like cotton welt cord in the end of my cording because I'm going to have another piece of cording coming along this bottom edge. So I'm going to back this cording up just a little bit so that I know that I've got a space in here without any welt cord. And I'm going to fold this over. So bear with me again because here I don't use any pins. So I'm just going to line all this up hold it all down. And I'm going to get it under my machine, keeping my 1/2 inch seam allowance. Really just need to get it started. And at this point, I'm going to take this pin out. I'll just move it over a little bit. Make sure my cording stays in there and I don't pull it out too far. I'm going to double check again and make sure my seam is open on the bottom, and it is. So you could have stitched this down together. Every time you take a piece of fabric to your machine and you stitch it, you're going to get things to tighten up on you. And I've just found over the years that the less I get things to stretch or shrink like that or pull, the better the end result is. So I try and put the least amount of stitching in as I need to keep everything in place. So I can minimize every time you take it to the machine to sew, you're going to get some shrinkage of fabric, and it may shrink in a place that you don't want it to shrink. Pins also, not that I'm really anti-pin, it might sound like it, but a pin, every time you pin a piece of fabric like this, it's going to bunch it and pinch it a little bit. So you have to be mindful about where you put your pins and how you put your pins in. And if I know that I'm lined up here, I'm lined up pretty well, I'm going to remove that pin. And I need to know that my corner is going to hit this corner, which it looks like it will. And I'm also, here's another dart. So I'm going to make sure that this is opened up. I'm actually going to go ahead and just give that a little snip, a little dart in there, just so it opens up a little bit easier. So here you can see as I'm just folding over my welt cord, and I've cut my strips on the bias. I've cut them at 1.5 inches. And that allows me to fold it over and get that 1/2 inch seam allowance. But you'll need to play with, you know, my welt cord is like 5/32 of an inch. If you're using a 1/4 of an inch welt cord, which is maybe a little bit more common if you're getting it from a local supplier, you may have to get a 1/4 of an inch. You may have bulky fabric, so you're going to need to sort of do a test strip and see what size your bias strip needs to be in order to give you that 1/4 inch that you want. Again, when I'm doing a slip cover, I have all this welt cord. I've made it ahead of time. I've actually stitched it all ahead of time, and when I do my pin fitting at my clients, I'm pinning an already finished welt cord into the piece as I pin it, so that when I come to my machine, the only thing I'm doing is just stitching it all together. So I'm just going to put this in here. I just double check that I'm still at the center. Trim some of that away. Just trimming some of the loose thread there. Just gonna double check that's in the right place. This is gonna hit my corner fine. And so as I'm stitching, I'm gonna wanna make sure that I've got pressure on everything, because the bottom of the fabric is gonna have a tendency to wanna slide first under the whole piece. So you have to kind of keep some pressure on the bottom as you're sewing. Otherwise, it will stretch and distort in a way that you don't want. So I'm at my corner right now. So I just pick things up and I've got to pivot everything around so I can make this turn. Pin the next section, pivot my corner piece. And now I'm coming down the other side. I've come across the top, and this is down the other side of my slipcover. So I'm getting now to the bottom edge, and I'm going to cut away because I kind of leave about a ½ inch, 3/4 of an inch, could even be an inch, it really doesn't matter, of the lowest point. I don't want my welt cord in there. So I'm going to even this out. This is another seam that I need to open up, make sure that's open. Going to even out this section here. And I'm going to give this a little tug so that these will kind of match up where I want. And I think as I started, they were fairly even there. So that crept a little bit, but I think I can compensate that for that when I come around with my cording, and it won't be an issue. So the next thing to do, I'll flip this around and I'll show you. See, now my cording, it's in that seam and it's all stitched, and this was the top back. So the front of the back and the back of the back stitched up the sides, over and down, and that's what I put in, was this cording, this welt cord. So now the only other piece to do, I can turn this whole thing, show you, you can kind of see maybe. So this is the front where it had those darts. That's the front, and that's a front. This is the seat and the tuck-in. This is the front with a dart here. So the only thing left on this is for me to stitch the cording around the bottom and put the Velcro piece that I need. So I'm going to start, if this had a zipper, that zipper would be down this edge here. But because I know that I don't need a zipper on this, it's really easy. I'm just going to go right to the welt cord. So here's my piece. Start with a diagonal. I'm going to come back and stitch the other side when I come all the way around. I'm going to come back and stitch it to that. So I'm going to put some welt cord here. And here you'll just see how the welt cord gets stitched on by itself. So I'm just going to lay that in here. Again, I'm going to keep it back. Actually, I'm going to put it up fairly level with where that diagonal is. I'm going to fold it back on itself. And I'm going to start stitching. And when you're doing this, you want to make sure that you don't have any of your other pieces of slipcover under here, that you just have the one single layer that you're working with. You don't want anything else caught. You want to open up all the seams when you get to them. And this is where I don't want a bunch of cording, so I stopped it short. So all I have in here is just the fabric, and the cording kind of tapers off into that piece. On a slipcover, you can easily get many layers. You can get 6 to 8 layers of fabric if you've got a seam, and you've got welt cord with a seam, and you've got a layer top and bottom. You can get many layers in here, and here's a seam in my welt cord as well. So you try to minimize as many seams as possible, or open them up, or bulk. So that's why I cut away that welt cord, because sometimes it's impossible to get through 6 layers plus the welt cord. If you have a domestic machine, you probably wouldn't get through. Many people that do slipcovers also have a walking foot, which is a different kind of machine. Or they'll have something called a compensating foot. Those are specialty machines that work with bulk a lot easier than other machines. My machine is just a straight stitch, old straight stitch Singer Serger. Singer straight stitch. And it's really rated for dressmaking and window treatments. So it's not really meant to do heavy duty, but when I get it tuned up, I have my repair guy. I tell him what I'm doing with my machine, what kind of projects I'm doing, and he'll set it so that it has an easier time going through some of these heavier fabrics that I might be working with on a slipcover. But a denim is usually about as heavy a fabric as I like to do on this machine for slipcovers. And this is a chenille, which, even though it's an upholstery fabric, chenille tends to have a kind of a soft hand, and even though it's got a backing on it, this one in particular is a very light backing. Rubberized backing, it can also be problematic with your machine because this will want to stick. So in addition to the machine wants to pull it back, it might also want to hang up on itself on the top edge, on the foot. So you could have a lot of stretching and pulling issues if you're working with rubberized fabric. And again, that's probably not you or your skill level, it's the fabric. So here's another point where I'm going to stitch just a little bit more. I'm getting up to another seam. So I'm going to want to get over this seam area, but I open all of this up so that I have bulk evenly distributed on each side of this seam. I'm going to flatten out. This is my welt cord, and there's no cotton welt in here on this lower section. So I'm going to flatten it all down with my fingers and just ride over it. And when you're sewing, it's a good thing to let the machine sort of pull the piece through. You don't want to pull or push too much, because that's how you can get a needle break, which just really messes up your machine. Okay, so this is where I'm going to seam this piece and this piece together. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to have to cut one of these. I'm going to cut this piece. Let's see. I'm not going to need that. So when I seam, I like to get over the corner where I've already got a bunch of layers, and I like to seam someplace here in the back. I'm going to open this up just a little bit more, give myself some working room. Open this up. So now I can see where I need to cut. And I do just a very narrow seam allowance when I do my piping. So I'm just eyeballing this where this is going to overlap and give me about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. It's going to be about there. So I'm going to make a new cut. Now what I have to do, I'm not going to cut my welt cord just yet, because I have to stitch these two pieces together. So when I put them together like this, and put them under my machine, I should be able to attach. The welt cord, the welt foot really just doesn't want to go through without the welt, but I just, instead of changing to a straight, I just kept it on there. But you may have to change feet to do that. So now what I'm going to do, I got my needle started. I've got this welt cord, it's stitched up. I'm going to open up this seam. This is where having some flexibility and stretch in this bias fabric comes in handy. So now I can see where these are going to line up, and I cut off the excess. I'm just going to fold this over on top of itself. Stitch that down. Trim that. And trim that. So that is the bottom edge of my slipcover, and that's how the piping goes on, but we're not done yet. The next thing that has to go on to this bottom because it doesn't have a skirt. If you had a skirt, then you would have a skirt fabricated and you would be stitching the skirt on at this point. Maybe I'll have a piece, a little ottoman or something coming up, and I can show you with that. But this one doesn't have a skirt, so the next step for us is going to be to attach a Velcro strip. And this is the way I do my Velcro. The female side is what is going to attach to the slip cover, and I do the female side, which is the soft loopy side of Velcro. I put that on the slip cover. The male side is called the hook side, and that's the piece that I staple to the underside of the chair. And I always put the female side on the slip cover because if you were going to wash this slip cover, you do not want the hook side in your washer, because that is going to hook on, especially a fabric like this that's chenille. That hook side is going to hook up on this fabric throughout that washer, and it's going to totally ruin your fabric. So I always put the female side, which is right here. It's the soft loopy side. It's called a loop. It's called hook and loop tape, and this is the loop. But the first thing I'm going to do, I've changed to my straight stitch. I have to stitch another strip of this bias without the welt in it, because I need something to attach the Velcro to. So I'm going to move this down a little bit so I don't have seams. I know I've got a bunch of seams there, and I've got a bunch of seams here. I'm going to have another seam in this piece, so I'm just going to move it down just a little bit. So I'm just using my skinny foot for this stage because it's not going to pull and stretch the slip cover as much. And I'm just going to stitch this on sort of right along. It doesn't have to be right up against. See, all we're doing is sort of creating this lip right here. I'm just going to trim away a little bit of the excess on the corners. And just make sure as you're going that you've only got the layer that you want in there being stitched. You don't want to stitch something else into your slipcover seam. Where we're going to have another seam. So I'm going to stop. I can already cut it. Okay, so that is a piece of bias that's been stitched to the bottom edge of my slip cover, and this was all right sides together. So now what we're going to do is we're going to flip this whole thing upside down, looking at it from the bottom. Now I'm going to attach my Velcro. So I'm going to stretch all of this strip flat. I'm going to turn this little edge over about, that's probably about 1/4 inch or so. And I'm going to take my Velcro and I'm going to do 2 lines of stitching. So I'm going to fold this over as I sew this down. I'm going to run a line of stitching down this side here and then along the other edge here, which is going to ride right up along the cording edge. And you can kind of feel it as you're sewing it. You can kind of feel it and you'll know it's there. I'm going to stitch, I like to do this outside edge first just because it kind of keeps things neat and keeps things kind of a little bit more together. And I can feel where this cording edge is and I can see the stitch lines that are here. So I want to make sure nothing gets stretched too much, because if it gets stretched then it's not going to fit. So I'm going to give it a little tug, straighten things out. Every time you stitch around, things get a little bit tighter. And you'll see that I usually use this beige. I use beige because it generally goes with most fabrics, although you should never see this fabric or this color. This is something that's hidden on the slip cover. But instead of it being white, I've done a lot of dark slip covers, and having a white Velcro strip, it just kind of stands out. Whereas when I do beige, it just kind of blends a little bit better with any fabric. It doesn't stand out so much. And on the underside of the chair, for the male side, I always use black. And if you ever look at the underside of your furniture, it's usually black, sort of a non-woven fabric that's under there to kind of cover up all of the webbing and or whatever the supports you have. It's usually black fabric or black non-woven fabric. So I find when I put black on it, if it peeks through a little bit, which then here again, like if you've got your slip cover on, you'll never see that Velcro. But every once in a while, you know, if a client wants to remove their slip cover and just have it off for a season, I don't want any, you know, I don't want like a white Velcro strip on the bottom of their furniture to be visible. So I've never had a complaint, and I use black for that reason. So here again, just make sure you don't have anything else in there that you don't want. Starting it is always the trickiest part, and once you get it started, you can see that I really haven't needed pins. I just kind of stretch and feel along as I go. Every piece is different, and this is the only kind of piece really that I would make a pattern for and not do a pin fitting on. But this is just to kind of give you an idea of a slipcover construction, and a lot of people have these Parson's chairs. They're not always cost effective to have slip covered because you've got a multiple of, you know, you could have 4 chairs, you could have 6 chairs, you could have 8 chairs. And I know when clients have come to me and wanted me to quote them for Parson's chairs, by the time they add the fabric into it and my labor to do each one, It's not always very cost effective, but it's a perfect, if you're a home sewer, it's a great little piece to try a slipcover yourself. The first chairs I ever slipcovered were, they were called slipper chairs, and that was about 30 years ago. And I still have those slipcovers on the chairs, and they still look great. So it's a good, it's after doing those chairs is when I decided, you know, this was something I could add to my business and do it for clients. I think sometimes slipcovers, they look intimidating because it's furniture, but when you actually get down to it, like window treatment and slipcovers, they're mostly just straight seams. There's not a lot of real intricate sewing that goes on. You kind of just follow what you have, and I like to do a tight tailored fit, so I follow the contouring of the piece. That'll tell me exactly where the cording is going to go, and I do the same thing. You know, unless a designer or the client, you know, wants to do something special. With a Parson's chair, you can do all kinds of different embellishments to the back if you want. You could have a big pleat in it, and you could have it sort of tie up or lace up in the back and leave some extra fabric there. You could add grommets to it and have some lace up effect. I usually like mine to be just kind of simple, and really just following the original lines of the piece. So here's where I'm going to go do the inside edge, and this is where I have to sort of tuck all this back in. It's kind of popped out, but you'll see just starting it is the hardest part. So now I'm doing this inside edge. And it's a little bit bulkier on this inside edge. So if you have a domestic machine, you don't have an industrial machine, you may run into some difficulties here. This is where a home sewing machine is just going to have a hard time with all of these thicknesses. I started out doing slipcovers with just my regular, it was a Singer straight stitch. It was a domestic model. It was a machine that I believe I purchased or was gifted it when I think I was in 9th grade. I did a lot of sewing. I started sewing really young. I actually had a little Singer sewing machine when I was 6 and started on that. And then when I was in 7th grade, we had classic home ec course, and that's when I got to learn on, in school on a regular sewing machine. And from there, once I had those lessons, then my mother let me use her machine at home. And I was doing, in 7th grade, I was making pants and shirts. They were not the prettiest, but they worked, and they were pretty involved. I'd already made stuffed animals. So, you kind of start small and work your way up. But home deck sewing is actually a pretty good thing for somebody who's a home sewer, because, like I said, it's a lot of straight lines. On this piece, you don't even have to do a zipper. So I'm just tucking all that back in. Okay, so from the front, that's how that strip looks. It's pretty stiff right now, but you'll see when I attach it, and I'll show you how do I do the Velcro. The Velcro's on the underside. From the front, it just looks like fabric. This is the slipcover. It'll sit on the chair. We're looking at the back piece right here. So this is just going to fold under, and the male Velcro is going to be underneath here. So that's our next step, and I'll show you how I attach the Velcro. So I'll move the camera and see you at the other table. Okay, so we've stitched up our cover, and now we're going to put it on, and I'll show you how it attaches to the Velcro on the bottom. So you first start with the back. Like I said, if this had a zipper, you'd have an open zipper, but because this has a straight back, I was able to do it without a zipper. So you just have to kind of shimmy it down the back. And then bring it around the front corners. The cording edge should fall right along the back where your edges are. And this space in here, this was our tuck-in. So you just press your fingers, tuck it all in straight. And then next up, I'll show you how it attaches to the Velcro underneath. I'm going to turn the camera, give you a different angle so you can see the underside, and I'll show you how it attaches at the bottom. Okay, so here's the underside of our chair. And you can see the black Velcro that I was talking about. This is the male Velcro here, which is the hook side. So you'll need hook side black Velcro for this underside. And this has 3 straight sides, and it has 1 curve. So most chairs don't have this curve, but I thought I would leave this to show you how to work Velcro around this curve. So the tools that you'll need is I just use a hand stapler. I've got a pneumatic one, but for this job here, this hand stapler works quite well. I have needle nose pliers in case I need to take a staple out. And I have a small tack hammer. You can use a regular hammer as well. Sometimes the staples just don't go in all the way, so you just want to give them an extra tap just to make sure that they're in place and they're secure. And you can see where the upholsterer has put their staples in here as well. So I'm going to start. You'll also need a pair of scissors. So this is how my hook loop, my hook and loop tape comes. This is a non-adhesive, so it either has to be stitched down or stapled down. And for this application, we staple. So I'm going to start in a corner. And you'll see here, if I went straight, it's not going to follow that curve. So I'm going to have to get it, snip it as I go, and bring it into this curve. So I'm going to start here, attach a few staples. Put enough to tack it. So to get a curve upward here, I'm just going to make some slits enough to do a pivot in the Velcro without cutting it all the way. And you can see I can just, by putting a slit in the Velcro here, I can pivot it up into this curve. And here's where I'm starting to see I'm going to need to cut and clip to bring it back down this curve. But instead of clipping upwards, I'm going to put a clip from the top. I might put another one in here. This will allow me to curve it. And it's okay if it's a little bit puckery like that. It'll sort of all flatten out and it'll be fine. So that's how I'm going to put some staples in here. I'm just going to ride that curve down. I like to put my staples going in sort of an angle or a perpendicular pattern. And here, I don't want to run it straight. I want to get the Velcro up into this corner. So I'm going to do a slit like that one. Where I can angle the Velcro up. I can clip it here. So now if I see anything that's a little bit raised, I go back and I just tap it a little with my tack hammer, or you can use a regular hammer. There's a little pucker here, so I'm just going to put another staple in. This is a staple that I'm not crazy about the way this one looks, so I'm just going to pull this one out. It just got bent when it was inserted, so I'm going to re-staple. Because there are staples under here from the original upholstery, sometimes a staple will hit that and it'll bend and it won't be able to go in further. So you just have to try a different position, angle your staple, and see if it works that way. So the next step, we're done with our Velcro. I've done all the other sides. So if you can see what we're going to do, this is the flange that we did, the strip that we did, the extra strip that we added, and this is our loop Velcro is on this underside here. So the next thing I need to do is I need to make slits where my legs are. I need to make a slit only up to, not including where the welt cord is. So you need a good sharp pair of scissors. And be very careful at this step. So you kind of I just estimate where this leg is coming up. And I'm only clipping up to and not including where this welt cord is. And I'm going to do it on both sides of the leg. Snip like that. And I have one more to do on this side. This is probably one of the scariest parts right here. So once that is clipped, then I take this piece here that covers where the leg is, and I tuck this under. So if you have a tight cover, it's going to be hard to do, but that'll also give you a good fit around the legs. It kind of, for me, I think it just adds a little bit of extra bulk in there. So now you can see how this is going to come down, and I don't think I need to make any slits in this strip at all. I'm going to let the Velcro attach. I'll turn it a little bit. Actually, I'll show you on the side first. It's easier to see maybe on the straights. So I'm going to pull it down. I want my cording to ride along the bottom edge of the frame of the chair. Pulling it as I go. I've already tucked in the fabric down on the bottom legs. And it doesn't take much. This Velcro is very strong. Doesn't take much pressure at all. So that's the 3 sides, and here's our top. And I just pull it down, make sure the cording is lined up. And this is where I just pull it, let the Velcro do its job in securing. If you had a more extreme curve, you might have to clip this strip here. But this chenille is also pretty forgiving and it contours pretty well. So I'll tip it down a little, maybe you can see. So if you can see here, it contours pretty nicely just with that flat strip. And over time, this is going to sit really well with the piece of furniture as people are sitting here. It's going to just conform really well to the chair form itself. So here's our chair. You can make any further adjustments on it now at this point when it's down. I hope you've enjoyed this video. This was just a simple Parson's chair. It wasn't meant to be a sewing tutorial. If you have any questions or any feedback, I'd love to hear that. If you found this video interesting, I'd love it if you either subscribe to our channel, share, like. We like thumbs up, thumbs down. If you subscribe, you'll get notifications when we post our next video. And we're going to keep it interesting. We're going to do different things that are home deck, textile related. If you've got any ideas about things that you would like to see, things that you think that we could show you, offer a short tutorial, please send them our way. We're always looking for new ideas. And we hope to connect with you soon. Thanks for watching.